Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I think so. Sounds good. Just adjusting the levels. So we're just gonna be a moment. I'm just helping out Ruth today
Okay.
with some tech stuff. And you're signed in as Ruth. Hello.
That's funny.
All right. Sarah's playing. You can hear Tara Hauska's voice, and Shanana Shinabe singing the Women's Warrior song that's from up north, from the Indigenous leaders in British Columbia, and that was a gift to the movement. And Indigenous women have shared that, around the globe together. So just really powerful moment. Are folks able to get into the slide deck? So if you just either a yes or nod, or if you want to just say yes or no on the chat, we are going to be using that as a resource today, and I'll share my screen in just a moment. We'll be following along. Thanks, Stephanie, for that. Awesome. I see checks and thumbs up. Great. So we're just going to do some quick intros. Sharif, you'd just like to introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll go over, so we'll get into the overview.
Gate, can you hear me all right? My name's Sharif Whitland. I'm an Afro-Indigenous Dene woman who splits my time between South Louisiana and Northern New Mexico. Mother of 6.
Cherie is super modest and humble, and I'm so grateful that you're able to spend this time with us. So Cherie will be co-facilitating with me. My name is Ruth Breach. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with Rainforest Action Network. I'm also on the steering committee for Stop the Money Pipeline. Yeah, and I'm a senior campaigner, but I think the partnerships work is like truly sacred, and this is like literally how we are going to beat the climate crisis, is this important work that we do together. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see, and we're going to go back to this first one. We're going to here, I see folks are here. That's awesome. Great job. All right. Are we here? You can see it? It's good?
Yep.
I also too, if folks could support seeing the Zoom, I think one of the edges I have is having like a dual screen where you can see both going on, but please do use that as a resource. And the piece here that we have is showing up for frontline communities and building long-term relationships. Let's see. Okay, just so the overview of the time that we're going to spend today, this is a 90-minute session. I think we'll go right up to that last minute. And what we're doing is building a shared understanding of the frontline community experience and expertise, and also needs. We'll review some language for foundation of the work that we're going to be doing together. Cherie's going to be sharing some story, or like a case study or story on white supremacy characteristics for those of you who are at Jasmine Banks' session last month on how white supremacy can show up in organizing. We're kind of building on that framework. And then we'll talk about some pivots that you as a NGO, community member, and actions that you can take to address some of these issues. And then we'll work on some of those effective practices together. And I think there's some like demystifying that we need to do, and what is like the definition of frontlines here. And I feel like this is also very iterative and fluid. So if people want to add on to this, or different ways to interpret it. But when we're using this word in terms of some of the climate crisis campaigns together, We're talking about Black, Indigenous, and people of color and low-income communities that historically faced multiple systems of oppression, including colonization, capitalism, racism, and patriarchy. And the effect of these systemic injustices and inequalities were historically and continue the first felt within these communities, and the effects in these communities have been disproportionately high. What we're also seeing is the systems impacts that the communities are the least responsible for the oppression and are often the first hit. So this includes climate change and most impacted. What we're also seeing is that the frontline communities are driving the solutions of the work. As we'll talk about a little bit later, Sharif's doing some incredible work on food justice and food sovereignty. That is truly an incredible vision coming to life. Let's see here. Sorry, here we go. All right, now this is your opportunity. I was hoping folks could kind of take a moment. I know we have a lot of expertise in the community. You know, we've all been working together on Stop the Money Pipeline. You maybe have been doing campaigning work for a number of years, but how do relationships with frontline communities and leaders show up in your work? And what I was hoping you could do is actually, you can access the document here. Oh, sorry. I'm going to go back here. It's hard to see everybody. So can you access the doc here and you can put in that there and type in actually your response. Yes, thank you, Sarah. So Sarah's shown us an example comment here. If for some reason you went to go to the same like thought bubble as somebody else, there should be plenty. So you can go to either slide 5 or 6. I'm going to stop my share for a moment while you all are doing this and just check in with the chat. So you have a couple minutes to go ahead and put those thoughts in there. Hey folks, if you're just joining, we're right here. You want to come meet us on the slide deck. And I also just want to name that I totally lifted this idea from the Wildfire Project. If folks have worked with them, they're really great facilitators, and just an opportunity for a lot of people to give input, and you can kind of see other people's experience if we don't always have the time to do the verbal input, or if that's how not everybody enjoys that, the big group dynamic. Let's see here. Okay, just one more minute and kind of get those final thoughts in. I see some extra word bubbles. The touching can take a moment to kind of play with. Also, if you're not comfortable with that, or you feel like, feel free to put it in the chat. Or if you'd like to message me directly, you'd like to like stay anonymous on that level, feel free to do that too. We want to give folks, you know, different opportunities to engage. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen again, but I am not gonna put it in present mode. I'm gonna keep it so you can kind of see some of the tools and keys again, because we're you know, we kind of want to get behind the scenes, if you will, so to see how the work is done together. Okay, cool. So everybody can see this. Okay, we're back in action again. All right, awesome. So just to name a few of these items, folks are working on climate justice issues, local chapters, online, looking at ways to building relationships there, climate action, fighting for representation and engagement. Yeah, that's definitely a theme that will continue to come up. Unequal impacts in the region, not often enough, right? I think almost every large nonprofit could say that. Working with supporting people in your region. We co-create strategy and tactics. Awesome. All right, that's what we want to get to. We support actions and amplify messages and action. Awesome. Okay, so this is great. Again, like I was saying, there's a lot of experience in the room. So I would invite folks that either have been doing this work or have had, you know, some really like strong learnings to join in the conversation in that way and share, you know, with this group so that we can all really learn from each other. Just a couple kind of like overview type pieces, and then we're going to get into Sharif's story. So thanks for sharing your experience there. Moving on here is that we as a coalition in Stop the Money Pipeline, I don't know if folks are aware, but if you're not, here's an opportunity to get kind of more intimate with this document, the Stop the Money Pipeline Organizing and Equity Principles. This is work that we've all agreed to in theory. And the idea here is to really like embody and practice the values that we've put forward here. And this is building on frameworks that came way before us, the Bali Principles of Climate Justice, Jimenez Principles for Democratic Organizing. Let's see. So maybe just a show of hands. Yes, I'm totally familiar with this document, or no, I've seen it. I haven't seen it before. Anyway, no. Okay. If you haven't seen it before, so I'm just seeing a couple of nods and a couple of thumbs up. Is this outline? So you can link on there, so you can actually hit the link, and I can put it in the chat as well. And it outlines kind of like Stomp's role. And a lot of that was in response to kind of equity within the work that we're doing and how we were building together and like our vision of working together. So in these pieces, the items that have really come forward is around solidarity, collective decision-making, distribution of power and labor, uplifting Indigenous and frontline voices, and grassroots solutions and policy change, direct action and escalation as a means to build people power and introspection to self. So we've been doing these conversations on a monthly basis where we'll actually like dig in a little bit more. We've done a session on introspection to self. Today we're getting more into the partnerships piece, which will be part of uplifting Indigenous and frontline voices. But you know, these things are they're very nice in words, but the reality is that nice isn't going to cut it. Nice isn't going to address the climate issue. What we really want to do is put the substance and the depth behind the words and really do that deep work that's going to take to really address the scale of the issue. As I mentioned earlier, so moving on to slide 8, Jasmine Banks really introduced a great framework that has been built up over many years. I've got some resources, if you can see in the down here. I'll put these up in the chat. That we've got Jasmine session, and then I have some resources at the end too that compiles all this. So I'll put that for you all. But this is built on a framework that Dismantling Racism put together, and then most recently Showing Up for Racial Justice. And this is literally white supremacy characteristics that show up in organizing spaces. If you haven't seen Jasmine's session, it was really great. She just laid it out super clearly. Jasmine with Uncoke My Campus. And we had some really great discussions there. So we're building on those pieces. But if you haven't seen that, this is still kind of an open invitation to have these conversations. And some of the characteristics that we're seeing in NGO culture and nonprofits, non-governmental organizations is around perfectionism, sense of urgency, defensiveness. So all the pieces here, there's an additional bigger list too. And some of the ideas that we'll go through is how to kind of move away from what is kind of white culture and white supremacy culture, where we can actually build the space to have respectful relationships together. So that's a lot of talking for me. I'm going to pass it over to Cherie. I'm going to stop my screen share here and pass it over to Cherie to tell more about her story and her perspective in this work.
Thank you. So I'm just going to tell you how everything went down. Well, I was living at home with my kids. I worked for a small town newspaper, and the BP oil spill really affected our community. And so once that happened, I started digging a little deeper, and I ended up on a boat in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, where we had pulled out a oiled pelican, and we were trying to get it back to get cleaned up when we realized that it was going to die. So we stopped, and we kind of just stood around and stood with the pelican and prayed and cried together while we realized that our whole way of being out in the Gulf was changing. Now it was a few years before we started working at that point on no new leases. We were trying to stop new leases in the Gulf. And it wasn't that long before we found out about Dakota Access Pipeline. So I'm a strong believer that people should go support and show up in a good way. And so we did that. We went to DAPL a couple times and came back home and realized that that same pipeline, the tail end of it, was going through 7 miles from my house. So we started to organize at that point. We got together any partners that we could on an NGO level, and then also started reaching out all along the route to landowners, started reaching out to communities that were going to be along the route, and building sort of a coalition. No, it was a coalition. And everything was going really good. We had over 100 actions to stop the pipeline. But while I was traveling that route up and down, we had talked for a long time, we being the people, about having a just transition space for kids to come, and where we could basically give an example of just transition in the deep South in oil country, because we're in one of the most racist oil country, place there is, and so we wanted that. So I just happened upon these 11 acres that were for sale, but the problem was the pipeline was set to go through those 11 acres. So we came back and fundraised a lot, and within a few weeks we were able to purchase that property. Well, we still had the problem that the pipeline was going through it. So the first thing we did was went to the Atakapa Ishak, because that's their land traditionally, and we asked to take ceremony and to get permission to work on the land at all. And they said yes. We asked if we could fight the pipeline from that land, and they said yes. And so that's what really started it. We made prayer ties and put all around the property. And within about a week and a half, the company had backed off and said that they were not going to go through that property. So that was our first early victory, was that we saved those 11 acres from the pipeline. And that kind of fueled the rest of the battle. We did over 100 actions to stop the Bayou Bridge pipeline before we ever even went into the swamp. Now, the swamp is the Atchafalaya Basin, which is the largest natural swamp in North America. It's also crisscrossed by pipelines and totally abused by the systems. There's flares that go on down there, and all kinds of bad leaking, methane leaking, all kinds of stuff. But it's still one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to in my entire life, and a lot of people live there. This is the place where people from maroon colonies or native people who were pushed back by colonization would hide. This is where people went to hide to get out of the Civil War, so they didn't have to fight in the Civil War. And it's where escaped slaves hid to protect themselves and to grow a family there. So right there on the Mississippi River is a place called St. James, Louisiana, which is a group of free enslaved people walked across the river and started their own place. Well, it was beautiful there. They were able to grow and have children and great-grandchildren and gardens and everything, but slowly and ridiculously, the industrial complex came in. So now they have over 100 facilities in their space, which include petrochemical facilities. That's cost them a great deal. That's what you hear when you hear people talk about Cancer Alley. It's that little space between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, and St. James is right in the middle. So we talked to them and created a beautiful, loving, lasting relationship with them too, as well. And they too were eager to stop this pipeline. They're eager to stop any more industrialization in their area. because they can't grow food anymore and they can't have the life that they were used to. And so yeah, so we had our property and we were starting to have a camp there. And like I said, we tried to be super creative. We did all the right stuff that you're supposed to do. Like, we had the petitions, we went to the hearings, we organized 800 people to go to the hearing. And most of these hearings down here, they have like one or two people show up, and one of them's me. So they weren't used to that. So it was just phenomenal experience to bring that many people in. We had what we call a Crawfish the Musical, where we did a live musical on the easement, which was pretty creative. And actually, it would have some of the workers, they would stop and watch us and drink a beer and allow, and didn't realize they weren't actually working. At that time, we weren't allowed to wear masks down here. There's a law. So we dressed up in costumes and wore masks that way, and nobody seemed to notice that that it was different. So we tried to skirt the law in that way. And then we got into the basin because that was the last part that they were going to build. And that's when things got real tough. We had to we lived out there for, I don't remember, at least 3 or 4 months that we just lived basically out there. We had camps out there too. And the landowners that were out there gave us permission to be on it, or we were on state land. And yeah, that's when the police came in really hard and heavy. Luckily, the swamp would kick their ass before they ever got to us because it's so unbearable out there for them. But we got used to it. We figured out a way to like work around it. That we were able to slow the pipeline down for 2 years. But unfortunately, it did go through, and but we still had our space. So we started growing food on that space, and now we give to the Front Yard Orchard Project, Lobelia Commons, with St. James community. We've been able to give them food and also plants, so that, not in St. James because the soil's so bad, but in other places, schools and things like that. Well, in the midst of all that, we made a lot of enemies, and some of these enemies were really violent that worked for the company in particular. And they would do things like they would go down in front of the camp and yell white power and things like that, which was intimidating enough. But at some point, they started actually stopping us and using physical intimidation, and we had to kind of deal with that. So at that point, we were like, well, we wanted to be able to protect ourselves, and in particular my family. I had young kids well, they're not that young now, but they were younger at the time, and I had to get them out of there. So we collected and pooled our resources and found a space in northern New Mexico that's called it's the Movement Training Network. And what we do up there is we allow space for people who are in these kind of situations where they're being intimidated against, or they're having to deal with white supremacy, or they're having to deal with classism, or any just exhaustion more than anything. They can come and stay and hang out and get some sleep, and then also help us build and just enjoy that space. So now I kind of divide my time between there and there. I end up down here continuing to build, and then when I get a chance, most of the time I go up to northern New Mexico and hang up there and help and encourage people to come and enjoy that space. During the time that we were doing Bayou Bridge, we had thousands of people that came through, probably not more than a few hundred at a time. And people came through in different ways, and they brought different things. I made a joke the other day that you could be at the camp and then turn around and go somewhere for a weekend, or go to at that time, remember, we were all gathering and doing things. So we would gather and then we'd come back and it would be a whole new group of people, and the whole space felt different, because people brought their own experiences and their own joys and miseries to the campaign, and tools, like a special, like their own kind of tools. So we dealt with a lot of different people. So I've seen people show up in a way that was really honoring, respectful, and I've seen people show up in a way that they were able to throw down and just amaze us because at their skill level at what they were able to do, and still not step on feet or get in the way. And I've seen people come in who were looking for an experience like Standing Rock, and very upset with us because we couldn't provide that exact same experience or what they thought that experience was. You could be at one place for a little bit and get one experience, and another person come in right behind you bringing their own stuff and get a completely different. It's impossible to recreate a campaign like that. And so so yeah, we would have people get mad at us because we weren't able to do that. We'd have people get mad at us because we wouldn't let them go in the swamp, but they had no swamp experience, and some of them couldn't swim, and they'd still be mad at us because we wouldn't put them on a boat, without swimming, without jackets and things like that. So yeah, I've seen the entire spectrum of ways that people can come into a community, and I try to take that into my own heart. So when I turn around and I go to another community, and I try to take those lessons that I've learned and really put them to work. Um, yeah, I think that's about it. We like I said, we weren't able to stop the pipeline, but we did learn a lot, and there was a way. When we first started, we had goals that were set up in a way that we couldn't lose, and that meaning that we would have this space into perpetuity, one way or the other, that we would be able to bring kids in and grow food and do all this stuff. And then we supported the community of St. James getting an evacuation route, which they have the route. They don't have the money for it yet, but they're still working on that. But and to lift up the needs of the Atchafalaya Basin. So we had a plan when we came in, and a lot of people, when they had their own plan and their own ideas of what winning looked like. And so they would come in and try to disparage the work that we were doing or just be negative about it. And they just didn't have any idea that we already had this idea of what we wanted. Now when I say we were 5 Indigenous women who started the Bayou Bridge campaign, working with this larger group and coalition. But we really ran the camp. Well, we made decisions about the camp. So that was who we were. But and are, because all those people still continue to be a part of the food forest. It's called Indian Bayou Food Forest. Yeah, I guess I'll stop there, except to say, the most important thing was just, and I think out of all the things that we did, the most beautiful and the most important was going to the First Nation, to the people there first, and saying, is it okay for us to be here? Is it okay for us to do this kind of work from here? And that made everything feel so much better to us, just feel better. But I also felt like it had a way of bringing in ancestors and bringing in spirit back to the land, that was remembering and honoring, and not trying to take over or just making a stand there. We realized that we were on stolen land. That's not my land. I'm Danae. Uh, but I think that was the most important thing that we learned, is that you have to know whose land you're on, and you have to connect with the people who were there originally, because that starts the whole thing off in a good way, in a gentle way, and just people being patient and understanding that there's a plan. We had a plan of what we wanted to do, and it wasn't required of people to come in with their own ego. This is how you do it. This is, whatever. And we appreciate, of course, any kind of input. But input that's not dominating or trivializing or too masculine in a way that it stopped, didn't take into account that the women that were working there had actually this vision and this idea. So like I said, I'll stop there, and we can move forward. If anybody has any questions, we can do that right now too. Anything about the work or about how we did it.
Yeah, folks, and feel free to either come off mute, put your question in the chat, or if you want to join on slide 10, you can kind of write it on that sticky note looking thing. So whatever you're more comfortable with. Sharif definitely was open to questions. Did we lose Sharif?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, I couldn't see you for a second. I see Lisa has their hand raised. Lisa?
Hi, thank you so much, Sherry. That's amazing. My question is, if you could do anything different, or if you could have told yourself something in the beginning that you know now, what would it be?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a great question. What would I do different? We had a great group of people, and I always called them the best of the best. I don't know if they are the best of the best, but they felt like it to me because they were there and had our back when we didn't have anybody. And I think if I had anything to do differently, I don't want to say I wouldn't have taken it seriously, but I will say that when your central nervous system runs on high speed for 2 years, when you get off of it and you're able to relax, you just crash. And I didn't understand that. And I'm trying to get through to the people in line 3 or the people who are on all these other struggles to just take more frequent breaks and be gentle with yourself, because uh, it felt like when we got done, like, first of all, there was exhaustion coming in, but I also went through a really strong depression. And I always want to share that with people, because people don't understand when you're going all the time, and you have this mission and this plan, and then you come to the end of that, there's sort of this idea of like, well, what do we do now? And there's also like looking back and saying, what should we have done? What could we have done to want to win? And it's hard. It's really difficult. It took me probably another year before I was able to look back at that year and say that was probably the most difficult year of my life after the campaign, just being able to deal with that. So the thing I would have done differently, I think, is I would have taken a little bit more breaks, and I definitely would have called in some sort of, like we did ceremony, and that's really important, but I would have had more ceremonies, and I would have called in like mental health workers to help people, or had more, massages and more things to help people to be able to get that tension out of their bodies before it starts to attack your body and before you have to deal with it later. Thank you for asking that question.
Thanks for sharing that, Sheree. I think that in itself is a huge learning, and seeing a lot of gratitude. I'm not sure if you can see the chat on your phone, but there's a lot of gratitude for you in there, for your both sharing your powerful words, and then also just good to see your face. So that's from Mary Gutierrez. Any additional questions? We've got a couple more minutes, and wanted to have this opportunity to have a direct interaction.
Ruth, it looks like there's a question on the PowerPoint slide.
Oh, thanks, Britton. Awesome. I see. So it says, thank you. Can you talk more about the ways the organizations showed up to support in a good way or not in a good way?
Other organizations? Yeah. So we had some cases where people who were supposed to be on our side or said they were on our side from the beginning, when the rubber met the road, they checked out. And that was really, really hard to deal with, just because you consider folks your friends at that point, and you just expect a certain level of support. And you have to realize that not everybody has the same tactics as you. But what really offended me or hurt my feelings was that those people didn't lift us up in a way that I felt like they were bringing us to the top. In fact, one of our coalition members actually went to the police department and told them they did a good job in arresting us. And that was really painful, because we had a group of people that were arrested earlier that week, and they had went and complained to them. Well, those were a group of white people, the first people that were arrested, that got complained to those sheriff and said, why did you do that to these young white women? And then when we got arrested and they were very violent, they threw us down or whatever, they went and they said, you're right, we have got to, stop these people, stop them from doing direct action, because they just didn't agree with our tactic. That was probably one of the most painful things I've had to deal with, as far as, like, I thought you were on our side. I thought you were our friend. So even if you don't agree with the tactic, you don't have to show up in a way that attacks the people that are doing it, And so that was probably one of the worst things. We had a lot of people that would show up and expect us to take care of them. And that was really hard. Like, they wanted a certain level of livelihood, why aren't there cabins? Why are we drinking out of this like faucet situation? Instead, or they wanted an authentic native experience, which we live our spirituality. It's not a show to put on. It's not an experience for white folks to come in on and get that opportunity to say that they hung out with a bunch of native folks. And that was really difficult to deal with too. There would be people that would come and expect you to pay for them to leave. I'm not making it up. Like, they say, well, we got here and now we're stuck. We can't be here. Is it okay? Can we borrow the money to get out of here? Usually at that point, we'd want them to go. So we'd be like, yeah, sure. but your job to be there isn't to take up resources or to cause other people more problems that they have to deal with. You know, when you go into a situation like that, you really have to be able to take care of yourself. And that was hard to get people to understand that it wasn't a game or a show. We were talking about our life, you know.
Thank you for that, Sharia. I know that experience was really hard on you and the community that was there. And hopefully we're going to talk about different ways that NGOs can show up. But
Can you talk about the good ways? There were some good ones.
Oh yeah, please do.
Yeah, there was because there were people who came in. I know there was a certain group, I can't remember their name, from St. Louis, and they came in and they had all this experience and all this beautiful thing, but they didn't come in and plan anything for us. Like they just basically was like, how can we support you? And that meant they did the dishes one night and the next night they were locking themselves to a car on the easement, you know, allegedly. So that was it. It's just having people come in open. We also had a lot of groups that came in with resources, because a lot of times you're in the middle of it, you can't do that. But that fundraising piece is hard to get off the ground and keep going once it's there. And they would come in and just provide resources with no questions asked, like, how we don't know how to support, but here's something that you can do. And that was always helpful and super nice. And then yeah, I really enjoyed. It's like our ride or die NGOs. You know, we had some of them, whether they were local level or on the national level, that would actually show up in a good way and send people down so that we had people to do the work, you know, that was required. And that was important too. So there were both. There were good and bad.
To build on this, so a couple more questions have come up in the chat and on the slide deck. You're talking about what was more helpful to you, Sheree? Was it was actually people coming to camp or money? That was one of the questions.
It depends on who was coming. But the people that were coming, yeah, there was a point where I remember being on the ground with the police on top of me, and I was asking for people to come, and it was more like an open call. That was when we were at the very height of the campaign, and we needed feet on the ground. We needed people to be there to protect us. So that was when that was most important. But then there was also time, especially when we were trying to buy the property. We wouldn't have been able to buy the property if it hadn't been for people, NGOs, and just people who were able to just give up little bits of cash to large pieces of cash. And that's what started off the whole thing of us being able to fight as hard as we did, was that we had that space and the opportunity to do that. So I guess it's kind of a 50-50. It just depends on what's needed at the time in the campaign.
Thanks for that, Sheree. So we have a few more questions and then we're going to close them out, but let's not end the conversation here. So just a few more here. Did the original owners of the land show up after your initial outreach and stay involved?
They have, and not so much in the direct action campaign, but definitely in the growing food part. They really have come up, and they like to put their hands in the dirt and grow things and help us to distribute things. And I asked them to come last week. COVID has kind of kicked everybody in the butt, you know, so they weren't able to come this last week. We had a whole group of builders that were out there that built us a new cabin and are helping to expand in our shower house, so we'll be able to have more folks out there, and the nursery for the plants too. But yeah, they did stay involved up to a certain point, but they definitely backed off of that direct action, and I'm glad that they did. Honestly, sometimes you have to protect people, and if they had asked me to be a part of it, definitely would have. But up to that point, I didn't want to add to their stress or add to anything that was going on in there. They're still trying to get federal recognition, and we didn't want to do that. So we didn't actually throw that name around very much, or their names around very much, because we were trying to give them plausible deniability so that we could protect them.
Thanks for that, Sheree. We have two more questions from the slide deck. There one here. How do you deal with the trauma from being brutalized by the police?
Oh gosh, that's really hard. I mean, I'm still dealing with it, I think. And that wasn't my first time, and it wasn't the last time either. But Yeah, I was really exhausted. I went and saw a counselor, and I still do, and I don't mind saying that, because it really helps to be able to express yourself and to get these tools that sometimes we don't get when we're young to be able to deal with this stuff. And then we took ceremony on a number of occasions and just tried to clean ourselves as far as like the way we were thinking, and to really hold the humanity of not just our people who were out there, but even the people who came to fight against us in a way that didn't give them a break, that's for sure, but at the same time to realize that they are human, and they are just super misguided, misunderstanding, and do not prioritize correctly for the earth, for our mother. So yeah, it was really difficult. And even like to this day, there's videos out there, and every once in a while, I just saw the other day we had a film festival and we saw the film, and it was that part where we were being thrown down, and I still had to, even after all these years, I had to just get up and go get a drink, and I just didn't want to trigger anything, start anything off again in my head, and worry about it. Otherwise, you could let that kind of stuff consume you and be angry, and their intention is to make you stop. Like they want you to stop doing what you're doing. And I'm just too damn stubborn for that, first of all. But secondly, we couldn't do that because we didn't have space to allow for that. We had people who were literally getting sick and dying at the time in St. James, and so we didn't have that option of or we didn't feel like we had that option of backing off and letting them win. So it was very difficult to deal with, and still is very difficult to deal with. And you re-injure yourself. Like we've been to other places. I was at Line 3 just last week, and to see that what they're dealing with, the people that are chasing them around, they have security everywhere. It was just like the height of ours, except I think they have a little more as far as security and police officers, because we traveled, I was with them, and they traveled, chased after us for 20 miles. And finally someone stopped and said, "Why are you doing that?" And they said, "Well, it's a public," the bad guys said, "Well, it was a public road. They could do what they wanted to." And so we ended up having to, be sly and get off the road and go different way to get where we're getting. But yeah, those intimidation tactics are being used in different fights all over the country. And people are going to need, when they get out of this, when it's over, or whether you win or you lose, you need people to be there and to be respectful and honest, and have those, let you process that, give you space to process that.
That's so important. And thank you, Sharif, for really sharing that insight, and just kind of like the heaviness of that, like both internal work and then, continually showing up. Our last question here, and then Lisa, I see you have another one. We'll see if we can field that a little bit later. Is what were the things people did when they got back home? Were they helpful or not? This is our last question.
What do you mean when they got back home? Like when they went back to their space?
Yeah. So when they left camp, or like went back to where they were from.
Yeah, a lot of people did solidarity campaigns, solidarity actions in banks and things like that were connected to the campaign. And that was always nice, to get that word out across the country. We had like banner drops and all of that. And then a lot of people had fundraisers and raised resources that they were able to send back. And then a good number of people would stay, go home and visit for a while. And then they were able to bring themselves back, at a certain point, and stay for a few more weeks. And that was always good, because at that point, you're old friends. So it's good to see old friends always coming back. But yeah, I think those were the most important things. I can't think of anything else. And a lot of times, like, people just still connect, just knowing that people are out there who care, and saying prayers, and are saying, I'm reach out to you and ask if you're okay, if you need anything or whatever. Those are always super important, just because it's not an in out kind of thing, is it? You can't just show up and then you leave a piece of your heart there if you're really invested, and then you leave, and then you come, it stays with you, that those struggles stay with you and become a part of your psyche, a part of who you are in this battle, in this longer struggle.
I don't know if you all, but this is how I wish we would have spent a whole year on Zoom. I feel like I'm visiting with Cherie right now across the table. And so thank you for, like, I would say, your generosity, like, in sharing these stories. Yeah, thank you so much. We're gonna just move in and just kind of get into, so that can we actually kind of like pull the veil back to figure out how we as finance campaigners to be a better solidarity network. And these are huge learnings that Cherie is sharing with us, and the amount of expertise and knowledge that she carries in within that community. Thank you so much. And also, Cherie, there's like beautiful pluses. Thank you so much. Absolutely, yes. Thank you. And those are all for you.
Thank you, Mary. This was amazing. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, folks, I'm gonna get back on the share screen. We're gonna be switching modes, or just, you know, different ways of using our brains today. So we're gonna jump back in the Zoom land. And I'll be showing, so also to demystify all this, you can see kind of the background here as well. We're gonna go up here. If you want to follow along on the slide, I'm on slide 11. But Cherie talked about people doing like bank work, kind of going back and forth to camp. And what we really wanted to kind of get into is like how Stop the Money Pipeline actually shows up, you know, throughout our network. And we can show up, we're talking about frontline partnerships today. So these are our truth tellers. We're talking about firsthand impacts. You heard about the security challenges. But I would even actually say visionaries, you know, in here as well. And then Stop the Money Pipeline as like our network. We could be a resource provider, and that could be like through some of the small grants funds that we've done in the past, and we'll be rolling out here this spring. And then as a space that we all share together as movement and coalition partners. So that's either through the campaigns within our work groups, maybe actions that we do together, or an event, things like that. But what we were going to do is break out into some groups. Ideally here, what we're hoping to build is a solid foundation that then we can build on, so that we as a network can be showing up in a good way for frontline and Indigenous and Black communities. So here we're going to be mixing this up a bit. I'm going to stop the share so I can just explain this a bit. We're going to do breakout groups. We've got about 10 minutes for you to talk with your small group. We're going to break out into 8 groups, and each group is going to have a topic. So some of these topics are things that show up prominently in our work, and your group is going to explore this topic. Like, what does it mean? How would you define the concept? Examples of the ways that challenges have come up with this term. What are some of the tensions? And then how do you apply? Because essentially at the end of the day, what we want to do is be embodying the values. The values are only as good as the practice and how well we apply them. So that we can be supporting people like Cherie, her community, our friends up at Line 3, Stopping Line 3, MVP, or any community that is really at the front lines of climate injustice. Okay, so if the Zoom magic works well, you will be transported into a small group with the other participants, and you will have a topic that was there. So these topics are free, prior, and informed consent, cultural competency, humility and curiosity, transformational relationships, solidarity, language justice, mutual bottom line, self-representation, and equity centered.
Just one last sec and I'll get you all in your groups. These are pretty small groups and a couple of folks may not make it, but one moment, I think that should do it. Okay, open all rooms.
All right.
That's everybody. Perfect.
Thank you, Sarah.
Woo.
Oh, sorry. We were trying a solidarity experiment that was truly an experiment. Awesome. I hope you had some super rad conversations. We just did. If you can come to slides 13 and 14, share your thoughts here. We're just gonna do them on the slide deck, or if you want to put them in the chat too, that's totally fine. Just to save on time, but wanted to give people opportunities to like, thank you, Sarah. Sarah put the slide deck back in there. If you're not on there with us, to just kind of go through there, and put in, you know, what were some of those tensions? You know, is this concept too broad? Do you not know how to apply it? Like this is the space, to be honest. We're totally learning together. As you're writing and people here, this to me, like, I don't know if people have been through like the Rockwood leadership, and my purpose, I feel like my purpose is to support like grassroots and front lines and to reallocate resources to them. So in defining that purpose, that means like I've had a lot of learning and a lot of mistakes in applying some of these concepts. And I'm just really appreciate the people who have come before me and have been patient and kind and generous with sharing their knowledge. And so I hope to help create some of that for you all, because the more people that we can have that can be rad leaders that know how to show up in a good way, that's how we're building the movement that we truly, you know, value. Awesome. I'm seeing some really great pieces here. And if there's no more room on 13, feel free to flow over into 14. And also too, if you want to make the shapes bigger, you know, own this as much as you want. And we'll just give another 2 minutes for any report backs, and take a moment to read what other people are putting on here. You know, this is a really incredible group. Okay, awesome. Just wrap up those final thoughts. And again, there's more room. I see folks on 14. Awesome. I'm gonna make these shapes way bigger next time, so that this is a learning for me. I'll make them real big when we're doing report backs. Okay, so yeah, please take a moment and just look at kind of the gems and learnings that people are putting on here on slide 13 and 14. Yeah, and if some of you, if this is the first time you've dug into some of these concepts, that's great, because the more times we're having these conversations, whether it's here in your own org, in your own community, just keep that. I think that's part of the practice as well. All right, right on. We are going to jump to slide 15. I'm going to pass it back to Cherie. Cherie, would you like me to share my screen so that folks can see this?
Yeah, would you do that? That'd be great. I want to apologize for all the background noise. I was on my way home from home and from South Louisiana to northern New Mexico, and I pulled off on in a park. But this slide's called Building Together, and the first one says check your urgency, and that's a lot. When that says a lot in a little space. We had a lot of people that, and they were. I mean, that's kind of a given. Like, you know, it's the battle is raging. Then that sense of urgency is there. But we had people that had come and had decided already before they got there exactly what they were going to be doing when they got there, and then expected actions to support them doing what it was that they wanted to do instead of the opposite. So support outside of campaigns, that's important too, because a lot of times are running these campaigns. Like, I know for myself, there was a lot of times where I was just barely making it financially, physically, or whatever. And to have someone come in and just support me or just help build me up and was super important and felt good. And just feels like the larger movement is actually holding you so that you can do the work that you need to do. Moving at the speed of trust. Trust is super important. I can't express that enough, that you have to trust the people on the ground, what they know they're doing. They know what they're doing, and they know what's best for their communities because they've lived there for that long. Support leadership on the ground. We went through that. Shared visions and values. For our campaign, when you came in, we gave you a book. It's called the Green Book, and it had all our general things you should or shouldn't do while you were at camp, but it also had just like, this is generally how we feel about things and how we come together. So when you step into that space, if you didn't share that vision of values, you could always leave, or you could just at least understand where we were coming from. And I think that was super important. Co-creation of strategy and tactics. We had a morning circle every morning, and we would sit down and talk about, here's why we're doing the things that we're doing. And people would be able to put in, that's when you put in your input and are able to say, well, I'd like to see this, or have you thought about that? But just don't do it in a way that's like demanding. More of a general questions, or just how can we support you, the work that we're doing, and create that strategy. We had a wide coalition of people, everything from large, national NGOs that were able to, we would get on calls at least once a week, and then down to like little community organizations and how we could support them. Know whose land you're on. That's an important one to me. That's what I was talking about earlier with the talk about Ishak. But wherever you're at, I ask people pretty regularly when we're there, do you know whose land you're on? And it's always just befuddles me when people are like, no, like, whose land is it? I said, well, we should find out, you should find out. Because that's really important. First of all, just in that spirit, connecting back to that spirituality, but also in connecting with why things are happening in the way that they're happening. It's important. Ideate together, come together, like that's part more of co-creation strategy and tactics. Like, how can we build together, and building in a way that's not just in this moment, like just this one time. Like Ruth and I have been friends for, I don't know, maybe half a decade now or more. We worked on No New Leases together. We did all kinds of stuff together. And it's about, when she came to me for this, I was glad to support her. And I know that vice versa, if I asked her for support, that she would do everything she could to support that. But that's because we built this long-term relationship, this friendship that didn't just come together in this one time, in this one space. We've been able to connect and keep that friendship growing. Fundraise, yay, that's my favorite. No. But it's important because this stuff is expensive, and getting people out of jail. I remember one time we had people that had bonds and bail set in the tens of thousands of dollars, and just being able to go to get them out cost us thousands of dollars. That was necessary. And so that's super important, being able to fundraise and then give back. Consultation early and often, yeah. And come in like that too, with the open mind, and see how people are doing. That's what, when we went to line 3 this last week, we had been talking about it for several months, and having conversations with people on the ground there, what to expect, what we could do, how we could support them. So we knew all that stuff before we hit the ground. Once we hit the ground, we already had our ideas about not just where we were going to sleep and just the logistics, but most importantly, like how we wanted to show up. And so that consultation is super important with the people that are doing the work. I think that's it.
Yeah, that's great. We're gonna roll through. Yeah, like totally right on. This is, so that was kind of like, we're looking at kind of the big picture, and each of those bubbles there like is representative of a key like piece of the relationship. And this is frontline partners, but we're thinking about like our funding partners, our kind of coworkers, our family. Like, think about all of the partnerships and relationships that you carry in your life. And what I wanted to break down on this slide was really thinking of like the tools. So this is actually like how you're getting the work done. And these are ways. So Sharif's talking about showing up, that right there on the ground, in-person support. Like right now, there's a live ask right now for Minnesota for people to come. As you're getting vaccinated, as it's getting warmer out, they're asking people to show up. They're asking people to show up in solidarity in their communities. There's a big thing coming up with the Army Corps of Engineers. There's a bunch of bank actions that are happening. It's like, how can you show up? That in-person support. We saw just some really beautiful mutual aid programs during the pandemic. Just really, really incredible. And there's lots of communities that really hold that in a strong way, like in their values. So mutual aid. A more kind of like businessy type thing, a memorandum of agreement or memorandum of understanding. I think sometimes people have put a lot of fear or feelings on these things and they kind of weaponize them. But really what a memorandum of agreement or understanding does, it gives an opportunity for each party to like clarify the terms of the relationship. When I worked at a small group called Global Community Monitor, we did what was called bucket brigade testing. And every community that we worked in, which was literally dozens all over the world, we went in there and we said, what do you need from us? And sometimes they needed language translation. Sometimes they didn't want to do a media release, you know, so we actually like codified the terms together. How long were we going to work together? And I think in the NGO world, the bigger NGO world, people shy away from this as a tool because they feel like it only gets brought in when you've done something bad. Does that make sense? And that's not how it can be. It can actually be quite lovely way to start a conversation essentially. But sometimes people don't want that. They're like, no, that feels way too formal. So don't push it on people who don't want it. Again, we talked about funding. It's a great way to reallocate resources, you know, stipends and paying for people's expertise. If you're a community member that lives in the front lines, like you carry an expertise about your community, about the fight that's been happening. And just as much as a lawyer might, a doctor, like these people are literally experts, you know, in their work. Collaborating on grant proposals. People do that. We do that at RAN all the time. We started a thing at RAN last year or 2 years ago where we were, instead of giving small grants continuously to some of the same groups, we said, hey, how about we introduce you to some of our funders so that we're not the middle person. We're going to remove ourselves and we'll introduce you to them and help you build. So instead of a 5,000 grant from us, you can get a $25, $50, or $100,000 grant directly from the funder. And we don't feel competition because you serve a different need than we do. Does that make sense? So that's something that we're working on internally. And then organize a fundraiser. We see fundraisers all the time. You can do that. It doesn't take much work. Big thing is access to decision makers. So that in itself, it's not a money thing. But like, again, at RAND, we're working on, when we talk to banks, having self-representation. So one of the concepts, they're having people represent themselves. So bringing in leaders to talk directly to bank, maybe it's the CEO or shareholders or some of the vice presidents. This was really well done in the Arctic work, where you saw a lot of the Arctic leaders addressing the decision makers at the bank level and some of the asset managers. And then clarity, again, in your campaign commitments. Maybe your organization shifted priorities. You actually do need to come back and like tell people that and what that might mean. And then also consent on any video pic release forms. I think this is a huge issue in the movement. People notify me all the time where they see their picture, you know, on said organization's thing. And they're like, nobody contacted me. Nobody told me. Nobody wants to see themselves on social media without like a heads up. So just things to consider. To kind of move on here, we were going to do a case study. I think we still have time. We just need to do like a real abbreviated version. Sheree, do you want to give like a top line on the no new leases piece, and then we'll dig into some of the other pieces?
Yeah, what happened was we were doing no new leases, where we asked them to not have any more new leases in the Gulf. They already had most of the Gulf already. And one of the things that we did was we reached out to folks on the ground in the Arctic who are fighting that battle up there, and became really good friends. And then there was the eastern side. If you remember correctly, at that point, Obama had on his desk the option to drill on the eastern seaboard, and we had events down there, and people had come down and been a part of it and everything. But then when there was the opportunity to speak with the Obama administration, one of the larger groups, the NRDC, created a space for and allowed a conversation to happen, but we were completely left out of that conversation because the NRDC, just like most people, had written off the Gulf as not, as it wasn't doable for us to have no new leases. And though they made that decision for us, even though we were struggling and organizing against that. So they went and had a conversation with the Obama administration, was able to convince them to take the Eastern Seaboard and the Arctic off of the table, which we celebrated. But at the same time, we were completely left out of that. Yet they were using pictures of the BP oil spill, and they were using pictures of us organizing in lease platforms and things like that. So they were using what we did and the work that we did, but at the same time not backing us up, and more importantly not allowing us to sit at the table on these conversations and speak for ourselves. Well, by the way, we know it's possible because Biden just did it. He just canceled all the new leases in the Gulf of Mexico. So it was a possibility, and there was a way to do it. We just needed the will to do it and that opportunity.
Yeah, we were working together a lot there. And I think Sarah Shore is on this call as well and was very active in that space. And that essentially the NGO like scarcity mindset, you know, cut the vision of this totally short, and also pit the like Arctic and Gulf. Like, it was like, we think one community is winnable and we think it's the Arctic. And I think also too, Sharia, thing that I saw that was really beautiful was you all coming together. Being like, yeah, you know, F this, like we're in solidarity with each other. And that is like a false narrative that was created by outside community. So on here, and this is just, you know, come off, I'm going to actually stop share for a second so I can see folks a little bit better. Yeah, but this will all be shareable. And what pieces were you seeing? Like, what white supremacy characteristics? So when you're hearing Sharif's story, and it was NRDC, but it wasn't just them. It was actually a pretty large coalition of groups. So what ones are you seeing? So the white supremacy characteristics that we talked about with Jasmine. You have this list in front of you. This is on slide 18. What are you hearing? All of this is they've written the whole list, every single one of them. Well. I saw somebody writing around equity washing, either or thinking. You know, are those resonating? Priorities and timelines that perpetuate white culture. Okay, tokenizing. Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I think I saw you highlighting that. Okay, but do you get the idea here into how in the strategy and then the relationship, how that can actually show up, you know, in the community? Does that make sense? Like that's the point here. Yes, Sandy, paternalism, not clear on decision making, like who's at the table, who's not at the table. Power hoarding, that is a classic NGO, white NGO move. And then superiority of the white nonprofit written word. Yeah, thanks for that, Sandy. And then build transactional, not taking the time or effort to develop the real relationships. Absolutely. And that's part of what we want to counter through this work here. Absolutely, thanks for that. Fear of open conflict, oh God. That's a hard one for a lot of people. I'm not sure why, but it's a big one. And the real things that need to be said aren't said. And so then the honesty is left off the table, or the directness. Okay, great. Yes, please. I'm going to just move here a little bit quickly so that to honor folks' time. In slide 19, I'm going to pull back up my share screen again so we can wrap up. Is now what we want to get to is the different, like, how can we show up different? This is part of that great resource from Dismantling Racism and Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice. There's a whole sheet that has an idea of something different. So all the work that we're talking about, you see where this purple arrow is? That's where the work is. So you can have a vision of, and they even lay it out for you. It's like, here's something different and how people can show up in a different way. And what your pivot is looking at, like, how can we show up different? You know, how can we not have transactional relationships? How can we move to transformational relationships? How can we step away from either or thinking? Or how can we have radical transparency where it's clear of like what the decision-making process is, what the budget is, who's involved in the decision-making process? Like, how can we move more towards a collaborative way of working in this? And that's where there's a lot of work here. I'm not gonna lie, this could be like a multi-year process and a lot of learning. So one thing here, but what I wanted to like really leave you with is ways to move to action. Okay, we've shared with you a lot of information today, and I'm so grateful for Cherie's like testimony and her experience, and I truly see her as an expert, you know, in this work, and I'm so grateful for her spending her time with us. But what I'm hoping from us and from all of you is to way to build your muscle of how to be a better partner, and ways that you can do that. And that you could do this afternoon. You could do it Monday morning with your team, you know, with your community, is look at the resources. We were talking about this in the solidarity group. What resources do you have available to you? It could be money. It could be social influence. You know, if you did a fundraiser, maybe more people would contribute because they really like you. Or you ask people, you know, maybe you have influence in your, you know, in your community. If you have an organization, you're part of an organization, is there an email list? Do you have a social media following? Do you have access to funders? Really dig in. Like, I think you'd all be really surprised at what you have available to you. That's been a deep part of my advocacy, is really dig in. Like, I like follow our organizational budget, like with a little highlighter and I look for anything that's unallocated. I say, hey, can we send this to her? And like be an advocate, essentially. And be an advocate that shares power. How can you reallocate resources to the front lines? How can you share power in your campaigns? Again, some of that like shared vision and values, co-creation, instead of like going to a group and saying, hey, we decided we're going to do this, more of like, hey, how can we build this together? And that opportunity is always on the table. And then really, again, moving to action, building out your broader vision. I was talking about that purpose from Rockwood. If you don't have time to go through that program, but reeling out like, what is important to me and what are my values and how can I live my values in this work? And then what is that first step that you can take? I wanted to give you all an offering here. One of the first steps you could take is to either contribute to an active fundraiser that Cherie has with the Just Construction Builders, or you could share, you could give and share on social media. And then the third step is you could share it internally within your community or within your organization for them to then amplify it. Like, this shit gets just crazy. Like, it could just blow up if that's the way your willingness to really get involved in this work. Okay. Any final things that you would like to say, Cherie?
Nothing except, I mean, I think just part of that is just coming with a clean heart, realizing what you have, like you have something to give, you know, whether you think you don't or you do, you know, and how that connecting human to human really, it really expands you and helps you to like grow as a person and grow as an organizer. So don't think about it as I'm giving to someone else. Think of it as I'm creating space for myself to be a better, stronger organizer and person within this movement.
Yeah, thank you for that. This is all shareable too. We're like not trying to own this content. If you want to share this in your networks, in your and community, I do ask maybe people cite it, like, hey, we got this information from this. That would be super helpful. But share it around. We need to teach each other. We need to grow and build. And then the last thing I just wanted to leave you with, I think people ask me too, like, where did you, and this was like early college, you know, like running into bell hooks and like leading, but there's some really, really great information about solidarity and people that have like really embodied this and like our thought leaders here, as well as our frontline community leaders. There's literally a wealth of knowledge if you're willing to open your mind and heart to really taking action in this space. But thank you so much. Each of you will work with Stop the Money Pipeline and getting this recording out. And thank you for spending your Friday, you know, morning to afternoon with us. And Sharif, safe driving.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care, y'all. Get off screens. Go bye.
Everyone.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Terry.
Happy Friday.
Thank you so much.
And everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.